Barbados tight-lipped on the sale of its majority stake in Liat. Our top story in Caribbean Newsline for Thursday, May 16th. From the CMC News Center in Bridgetown, I'm Ricardo Roberts. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Barbados' Prime Minister Mia Mottley is holding close to her chest whether her country intends to dispose its shares in Liat. Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown last week confirmed that his government has submitted a request to purchase the 49% stake in the regional airline, and he was anticipating a favorable response. But Mottley, whose government is Liat's largest shareholder, says she will not have any discussions on the issue in the public domain. She said her focus is on ensuring reliable and affordable regional transport.
I have been in public life long enough to know that when discussions are at a sensitive stage, that the worst thing you can do is up the ante by trying to have some kind of public expression that may well lead to hardened positions and an inability for people to negotiate in good faith. Suffice it to say that the government of Barbados, at the appropriate time, when discussions are concluded with stakeholders at all levels, will speak to the country. Suffice it to say that by whatever means we choose, whether existing or other, there will be a commitment to providing affordable, reliable air travel between those in the Caribbean, because without that, we accept that there will be a serious constraint on our people.
In addition to Barbados and Antigua and Barbuda, where Liat is based, the other major shareholding governments are St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, and more recently Grenada. In total, they have just over 94% shareholding interest in Liat. The remaining shareholders are private companies, other Caribbean governments, and employees. Staying on the regional transport front, SVG Air has denied reports that it is considering pulling out of Grenada. The carrier is the national airline of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, along with Mystique Airways, and currently operates flights between St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda, Montserrat, and Grenada and Carriacou. It discontinued flights to St. Lucia from April 30th. The company's managing director, Paul Gravel, admits the airline has been plagued with financial challenges. But he says that despite a video circulating on social media, it is not considering pulling out of the Grenada market.
We're not pulling out. The issue was that the company has been losing money for 20 years, and we've been appealing to past governments that we need help, we needed to raise the fares, that we needed some taxes reduced in order to try and keep the fares down, that the Islander, which is made in England, the company in England is in trouble, and if the company goes out of business, we won't be allowed to fly that aircraft, because if an aircraft is not supported by a company that's in business, it cannot be used in a commercial service. And we have 7 of these 19-seat Twin Otters. That is what we really should be using for the Grenada service. But the way it's currently structured, there's no way we can use the 19-seaters in Grenada because the fare's too low and the taxes interregionally are too high for us to work with the current situation.
He says, meanwhile, SVG Air will remain in the skies.
At the moment, we're still going to continue to fly. We have 4 of those 9-seaters, the Britain-Norman Islanders, and we're continuing to provide the service with those for the moment.
MP for Carriacou and PT Martinique Affairs, Kendra Mathurin Stewart says meetings were held on Tuesday with the manager, and they are now working on a solution to have the airline remain in Grenada despite the challenges.
I met with Mr. Gavel and the manager, Mr. Lendo, at my office at Legal Affairs, and we discussed these issues. Now, there are 2 things that are on the table. The request for a waiver of taxes for persons traveling between Union Island, from Grenada to Union Island. And secondly, the issue of subsidies to ensure that the 19-seater, if they decide to use it here, would be a viable options. Those options we will be discussing with the government, the entire government, and it's something that I intend to raise and to bring in Cabinet for deliberations and for the way forward.
She says it would be a travesty of justice to not have connectivity between the islands.
And that report from Eugenia Peters of GBN News. There's a prediction that about a third of the Venezuela population could flee the Spanish-speaking nation as the political and economic crisis there worsens. That warning from Jose Cardenas, director of the Washington-based consultancy Vision Americas, who says millions of Venezuelans could seek refuge in other countries, including Trinidad and Tobago. Opposition forces led by opposition leader Juan Guaido, who has declared himself interim president and is supported by the United States, are trying to remove President Nicolas Maduro from power. We get more in this CNC3 News report.
Jose Cardenas points out the increasing pressure of sanctions being posed on the Maduro regime by the U.S. and other allies translates into a shrinking of resources which that regime needs to stay in power. According to Mr. Cardenas, ordinary Venezuelans will continue to suffer and they will flee in increasing numbers.
In the past few weeks, I've seen very, very credible estimates that 30%, 10 million people, could ultimately flee under the current conditions. So that is going to mean a very big problem for the frontline states, including Trinidad and Tobago, of attempting to absorb these people.
Jose Cardenas observes a steady war of attrition is being waged between the Maduro regime and the Guaido coalition. He told us he's not very confident that current rapprochement talks in Norway between representatives of both sides may bear much fruit.
Because it's going to be a slow grind as conditions continue to worsen and the diplomatic pressure continues on the Maduro regime. I don't see any alternative, but the Maduro government continued to entrench itself against the popular opposition and a refusal to countenance that major change is needed in Venezuela.
CARICOM has adopted a position of non-interference in the Venezuela situation, although it's offered to mediate in any peace talks. However, Mr. Cardenas believes the Venezuelans are taking careful note of who their friends are right now.
When a new government comes into power in Venezuela, you're probably going to see decisions being made in Caracas with a reflection on who stood with us in our darkest days and who did not. And so whether it's business, whether it's diplomatic, I'm sure there's going to be a lasting impact among the new Venezuelan government, who I can't predict who's going to be there. But there will be a sense among Venezuelans who was with us in our darkest days and who wasn't.
You're watching Caribbean Newsline. 6 of 8 prisoners who escaped from a prison in Trinidad and Tobago have been recaptured. Stefan Austin, Kerry Valentino, Joshua Janet, Mikhail Mohammed and Brent Johnson were held Wednesday evening in Las Lomas. Now, Atiba Sealy was recaptured around 11:15 on Thursday morning in the same Las Lomas area. Olatunji Denbo and Michael Findlay are still at large. The 8 had escaped the Golden Grove prison in Aruca early Wednesday morning by cutting through 2 steel bars in the cell they shared and then jumping over 2 perimeter fences. 7 of them are on remand on murder charges. Acting Superintendent Brandon John, who has been coordinating the operational side of the search, said police had information the 8 were all together at the house where the first 5 were held. And Assistant Commissioner of Police MacDonald Jacob says all resources are being utilized to apprehend the other fugitives. And coming up in Caribbean Newsline, the ILO tells regional countries they need to adapt to the changing labor market. Stay with us. More news after this.
Welcome to this year's 50th Caribbean Broadcast Union Assembly on the island of San Andres. San Andres is a small archipelago located in between Jamaica and Panama in the Western Caribbean Sea. A lush, exotic island rich in culture, history, gastronomy, and breathtaking scenic views. Known for its beaches and 7-colored crystalline waters, the island of San Andres will be proudly hosting this year's event. CBU members will enjoy top-of-the-line accommodations for an unforgettable experience in San Andres, connecting Caribbean nations through this year's 50th edition of the CBU Assembly.
The world's debt is 184 trillion US dollars. That's about 86,000 US dollars per person. Join Linda Tessar, the Central Bank of Barbados 2019 Distinguished Visiting Fellow for the 6th edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum, as she helps us understand just how in a world of rising debt, we in the Caribbean can stay afloat. Follow this important live broadcast of the 6th Caribbean Economic Forum on social media and on radio and television in Barbados and across the region. Thursday, May 23rd at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. in Jamaica. Visit www.centralbank.org.bb for more information.
Caribbean countries have been told they need to move quickly to adapt to the changing labor market. The advice has come from the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Guy Ryder, on the heels of the Caribbean Labour Ministers meeting in Barbados this week. He told CMC that technology, demographics and climate change are quickening the pace of change in the labour market, and the region needs to keep up.
I think the key question for the Caribbean labour markets is what is their capacity to adapt and to take advantage of new arising conditions. And I think above all in this era of digitalisation, we have to look at the question of skills and capacities. One of the issues which has been discussed, I think, more probably than any other in our meeting here in the last 2 days, has been about the issue of skills development and the notion of lifelong learning. The fact that as the pace of change is accelerating in the world of work, I believe it is no longer logical or possible to think in a sequential way that at the beginning of our lives we learn and are educated for 20 or 25 years, and then we work. That won't last any longer, because whatever you learn at the beginning of your life.
And that was ILO Director General Guy Ryder. Now, Caribbean tourism ministers are to meet in Cancun, Mexico, later this month to draw up a plan to address threats of yet another influx of Sargassum seaweed. The meeting comes amid a warning from the National Autonomous University of Mexico that the region remains under threat from the phenomenon. Belize Minister Manuel Hedera Jr. says the country's top 4 destinations have been impacted.
Our understanding is that the prediction for this year will be worse than last year. We are meeting in Cancun. All the ministers from the entire Caribbean and Mexico will be meeting on the 28th over there to come up with what is happening on each other's grounds and to see what will be an overall solution for. There's like they're making Sargassum blocks and they're making some gas, but that's on infant stages. So we have to come up with other formulas and see how best it's in something that it is not caused by human beings, but probably human errors that caused this to happen, but it is there, and we have to make sure that we do the best out of it.
The head of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, Ronald Jackson, says the Hemispheric Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction to be held in Jamaica next year presents an excellent opportunity for Caribbean voices to be heard on the issue. Jamaica will host the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas in Montego Bay, bringing together key stakeholders and actors involved in disaster risk reduction from throughout the Caribbean and North, South, and Central America. Now, Jackson, who is attending the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in Geneva, tells CMC News that CDEMA was very instrumental in lobbying the United Nations Office for the event to be held in the Caribbean. He says the region is itself a living laboratory, and as much as it still requires external assistance, it has advanced quite a bit in its disaster risk imperatives. But he says in the global space, the voice and the experience of the Caribbean sometimes gets lost.
Place where issues related to climate and natural hazard risk meets is really in the area of the underlying risk drivers, looking at risk and threats. How is risk and threats eroding our efforts around achieving the Sustainable Development Goals? And that's what we've been promoting at CDEMA and within the context of the strategy. There are so many big global agenda about. You have climate change, you have the Sendai framework, you have the financing for development, you have the urban resilience agenda, you have the agenda for humanity. How do our member states manage the weight and expectations of these global agenda? It can't be in promoting national silos. It has to be in terms of an integrated approach, and looking at the architecture nationally for delivering this. And I think the GAR begins to touch on some of these things.
Jackson said the goal is to ensure it's recognized that the Caribbean has disadvantages by virtue of its small size and open economies, and that it should be treated within the context that its growth is fragile.
We do not cause the changing climate, but we are certainly on the front line of the impact of the changing climate. So for us, it's really around how do we cope? How do we ensure that there is a robust enough humanitarian architecture within the region to deal with the impact on people, because we can't prevent the events. What we can do is reduce the consequences of the outcome by tackling those underlying risk drivers. We won't solve it overnight. We have to begin to look at new development. How do we now change the setback requirements, implement and legislate and monitor and enforce building codes and building standards, put in social support systems for the poor, looking at our infrastructure, ensuring that we are observing appropriate standards when we are building back roads and bridges, so that the next flood do not take those pieces of infrastructure out of operation and adds to our cost.
And ahead in Newsline Sport, the West Indies assistant coach hopeful the Caribbean men will stick to their game plan in the final match of the Tri-Nations series. Stay with us. Sport is next.
Today we are talking about Rick's case. Tell our audience a little bit about who Rick is.
Rick is a very successful businessman. We're here in his penthouse home, as you can see, who was on his way to a bar mitzvah in Boca Raton for his nephew, goes to Sears to not only buy something but to return a couple of items, who gets arrested and charged with a felony.
Welcome to this year's 50th Caribbean Broadcast Union Assembly on the island of San Andres. San Andres is a small archipelago located in between Jamaica and Panama in the Western Caribbean Sea. A lush, exotic island rich in culture, history, gastronomy, and breathtaking scenic views. Known for its beaches and 7-colored crystalline waters, the island of San Andres will be proudly hosting this year's event. CBU members will enjoy top-of-the-line accommodations for an unforgettable experience in San Andres, connecting Caribbean nations through this year's 50th edition of the CBU Assembly.
Buju Banton's Long Walk to Freedom tour made its way to the Dutch-speaking South American nation of Suriname on May 4th, and from all indications, it was another successful stop. Persistent rainfall threatened the concert, but that did not stop the patrons from streaming into the venue. Buju and his team are already back in the island preparing for the next gig, a pre-Mother's Day show on May 11th in Grenada.
West Indies assistant coach Roddy Estwick is hopeful the regional side will execute their game plan in the final match of the Tri-Nations series against Bangladesh on Friday. The Caribbean side was humbled by the Asian team, losing by 5 wickets in the second match after being crushed by 8 wickets in their first encounter. But Estwick is hopeful the Windies will settle down at the crease and produce a competitive total.
Well, we just need to score a little bit, show a little bit more intent with the spinners. They're going at 3.7 runs and over. In the 2 games that we've played Bangladesh, I think that we've got to look and strike at 4.5 to 5. And then that will give us a chance to get up to the total of 300, 320 that we're looking for.
And while Estwick hailed the efforts of the bowling attack, he lamented the side's poor fielding. The coach expects to see a different approach come Friday.
I think that we bowl well so far, but one thing that's been disappointing is something that we've worked very, very hard since we've come to Ireland is our fielding. We've dropped a lot of catches in the last game. We dropped 4 catches and missed a simple run out. So that's the area that we know that we need to improve in, and we're working on it. You know, the conditions are not perfect. It's a little bit cold, but it's cold for both sides, and we've just got to raise our game and try to improve in that area.
First ball of the match is 10:45 a.m. That's 5:45 a.m. Eastern Caribbean time, 4:45 in Jamaica. Staying with cricket fast bowling legend Sir Curtly Ambrose says Darren Bravo's current poor form is a cause of concern, especially with West Indies needing the left-hander to be at his best for the ICC World Cup starting at the end of this month. Bravo has scraped a mere 33 runs from 4 innings in the ongoing Tri-Nations series involving host Ireland and Bangladesh, and will have just one more chance in Friday's final to find his touch. Speaking on Voice of Barbados' Mason and Guests sports program, Sir Curtly said he believes the Trinidadian has what it takes to return to good form.
We must really be concerned about his form.
Right.
Because we need him to really come to the party and produce the runs that we know he's capable of doing. Right? Because for us to go deep into this World Cup,
right,
forget about winning it for now. Because we got to get out of the group stages first.
Right.
In order to get to the group stages, we can't rely on 1, 2, or 3 players. We need a whole team to click, or most of the team to click,
right,
for us to get to the group stages. Mm-hmm. And I'm a little concerned about Darren Bravo's form, mm-hmm, but I believe that he's good enough to get out of that slump, mm-hmm, and produce a run for us.
Meanwhile, Sir Curtly has hailed the performance of batsman Shea Hope. He believes the Barbadian and the experienced Chris Gayle will stand out at the World Cup.
I've always liked Shea Hope when the very first time I saw him, and I'm quite sure on the same program I've talked about him. Mm-hmm. He's in prime form, the form of his life.
Right.
And we're hoping that he can continue that rich form into the World Cup. Mm-hmm. You know, and I believe the way he's batting, I believe he's going to do very well. But on the other hand, we can't rely on him alone. Mm-hmm. We need someone like a Chris Gayle, top of the order.
Right.
Obviously, this is going to be Chris Gayle's last World Cup, and I'm quite sure he will want to go out with a bang. So we expect him at the top of the order to really fire us into a strong position, especially in the first power play. And then the other guys can take it on.
Cricket West Indies President Ricky Skerritt has paid tribute to one of the regional team's superfans, Keith Van Anderson, who passed away on Thursday. In a statement, he hailed Van Anderson as a dedicated supporter who literally followed West Indies to the ends of the earth and had an unyielding passion for the team he loved. Better known as the Pipeman, Van Anderson was Guyanese by birth but lived in England for more than 5 decades. Skerritt's statement added that Van Anderson's love for West Indies cricket and his infectious personality brought a spark wherever he went, and the players simply loved him, and he was loved by all. And the famous Lords in England also hailed the Caribbean figure. In a statement on Twitter, it said Van Anderson was in attendance at every Lord's test since 1973, and he would be missed by everyone at the club. Meanwhile, the table tennis fraternity in Trinidad and Tobago was plunged into mourning following the pastor of top-ranked player Dexter St. Louis. Now, St. Louis died on Thursday evening at his France home in Bordeaux, France, after a brief illness. Now, the Trinidadian represented his country with distinction in international tournaments. His most recent stint was at the 2018 Commonwealth Games in Australia. He was the only TNT player to have qualified for the 1996 and 2008 Olympics. He leaves to mourn his wife, Jermaine, and 2 daughters. That's the sport. We'll be right back.
The world's debt is 184 trillion US dollars. That's about 86,000 US dollars per person. Join Linda Tessar, the Central Bank of Barbados 2019 Distinguished Visiting Fellow for the 6th edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum, as she helps us understand just how in a world of rising debt, we in the Caribbean can stay afloat. Follow this important live broadcast of the 6th Caribbean Economic Forum on social media and on radio and television in Barbados and across the region. Thursday, May 23rd at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. in Jamaica. Visit www.centralbank.org.bb for more information.
Again, the major developments of this day. Barbados' Prime Minister Mia Mottley is tight-lipped on whether the country intends to dispose its shares in Liat. And in sport, West Indies assistant coach Roddy Estwick is hopeful the regional side will execute their game plan in the final match of the Tri-Nation Series against Bangladesh on Friday. That's Caribbean Newsline. For news and sport round the clock, subscribe to carlanews.com. For more of our programming, log on to CaribVision.tv and check out our YouTube channel. We'll be back here again tomorrow, but from all of us at CMC News, thank you for watching and have yourselves a good night.